Okay, we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat, and this time we have fantasy and sci-fi author J.D. Cunegan, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, so take it away.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. If the name sounds a little strange, it's because it is. My pen name is basically my middle two initials, JD, and Cunegan is the Scottish root of my surname. So when I was looking for a pen name, Google was very helpful on that. As you mentioned, I am the author of the Jill Anderson series. It's a combination murder mystery superhero with a little bit of sci-fi thrown in for good measure. It's not a hard sci-fi book. Basically, readers have called it Daredevil meets Castle. Um, so give you sort of an idea of what it is there. The main character, Jill Anderson, is a homicide cop in the city of Baltimore, and she's also the superhero Bounty. So a lot of what the series is her trying to solve a murder while trying to hide her secret identity, sometimes not very successfully. And a lot of times the two worlds overlap, and the murder mystery sometimes relates back to her somehow. So there's a lot of conspiracy, political intrigue, that sort of thing, particularly as you get later on into the series. Um, the fifth of the series, Betrayal, was just released a couple of weeks ago. So there are 5 books in the series right now. Bounty is currently available on all major e-readers for 99 cents. Great jumping on point. If you're looking for a series to read while you're stuck at home, this is a good place to start. You mentioned my fantasy roots. I have a contemporary fantasy called Natna. Um, it's basically Indiana Jones meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer. People who like the TV show Supernatural have seemed to really enjoy this book. I'm not a big Supernatural fan, but if people who are fans of that show like it, I'll take the comparison because I know that's a popular TV show with a lot of people. So that's a lot of the work that I've got going on right now. The murder mystery superhero series, and then the standalone fantasy novel. I've got a couple projects down the road that'll sort of blend the two, but I can't say too much about that right now because then that spoils stuff that goes on in my series, and I'm not in the habit of spoiling people, so I gotta be quiet about that. But that'll probably come later on in the year.
Okay, so what were your inspirations for the Jill Anderson series?
It was originally supposed to be a comic book because I grew up a big fan of comic books. I was going to be a comic book artist. There's actually some art I've done behind me on this backdrop. But when I went to college, little tip: don't study art at a non-art school because chances are it'll make you not want to do art anymore. So when I was in college, I stopped doing art, but I kept writing. So naturally, I became a better writer than I was an artist. So these comic book ideas that I had are now books. And when I was in high school, there was a popular comic book called Witchblade that was out. It's since been relaunched with a new character, but the original Witchblade back in the 90s was Sarah Pazzini was a New York City homicide cop, and she became the bearer of a mystical gauntlet called the Witchblade. And once I read that, the wheel started turning. I created what is now Jill Anderson. She's not a mystical trinket bearer, but that's where the science fiction comes in of it. Um, in that regard, she's more Wolverine than Witchblade. Um, Metal inside, secret government experiments, that sort of thing. But it's really my background in superhero comics, which as I've gotten older has fused with fantasy like Buffy, with murder mystery and other genres. Because every time I read something or watch something on TV, I take something from it, even if it's not a story idea or a character idea. And this is why I tell people all the time: if you're going to be a writer, you need to read, because the more you read, the better a writer you'll be. And part of it is learning what you can do with character and with genre. If you want to mash two genres together, you got to know what those genres are before you do anything with them. So that's really where that series comes from. I was a comic book superhero fan. I like some murder mystery more on TV than reading, but I do read some, and the marriage of those two is where this series came from.
Yeah, there's a bit of a history of detectives in comic books as well. So yeah, it's a good mashup. Tell us a little bit about your main character, Jill Anderson.
She, as I mentioned, she's a homicide cop in the city of Baltimore. She's from Baltimore, it's her hometown. She's stubborn as all hell. She takes the oath that she took when she got her badge very seriously. She's very much a right or wrong sort of cop. There's no real gray area with her when it comes to that, which has been an interesting thing to play with, particularly in terms of what's been going on in the real world with police officers and all of that. She's very headstrong, very determined. Once she makes up her mind on something, that's it. You're not talking her out of it. No matter who you are, you could be her brother, who's the only family she has left, and she's really, really close to him. But he's not talking her out of anything. She's fiercely loyal to the people she cares about because there's not a whole lot of them left for her. And sometimes that blinds her. She's very much a tunnel vision character. When she makes up her mind on something, when she sees one goal in front of her, that's it. That's all for her. She's not viewing the big picture or anything. And that gets her into trouble a lot of times. I mentioned the TV show Castle before. She's very similar to Detective Kate Beckett on that show. Readers have noticed it. It's not by accident. I was sitting there watching that show. When I watched the show, I would see Kate Beckett, and I think she's very similar to Jill. So it's not like I saw Kate Beckett and went, "That's who Jill needs to be." They already shared a lot of those traits. That's her. She's I don't know if we ever talked about representation or whatever, but she's asexual. So there's no any romantic plot that's in this series is not, it doesn't involve her. So you see that she has a male partner on the force. The genre assumption is there's going to be a relationship between those two. No, there's not, because she's asexual and he's gay and in a committed relationship with another man. So once again, know what a genre does, twisted to do something else entirely.
Well, that sounds like an interesting twist. Can you describe a little bit about the sci-fi aspects of the book?
The sci-fi comes from her origin as a superhero. Before the book starts, she used to serve in the army, and she fought in Iraq. And while she was in the army, she was approached by a scientist who was an expert in cybernetics named Dr. Trent Roberts. And he told her he was working on something called Project Fusion, which was to take the concept of cybernetics and prosthetics, and instead of doing something like, say, replace an arm after it's been severed with a prosthetic, to take the human body as it already was and make it better through cybernetics. Make her stronger, not quite invincible, but she can take a lot more punishment than an actual normal person. There's a supercomputer in her head that she uses to help solve murder mysteries, or as her partner calls it, cheating. She has a titanium-laced skeleton. So Project Fusion and what that does to her cybernetically is the crux of the science fiction in the series, and it's a storyline that I lead you to believe is done at the end of the first book, but it's not. It rears its ugly head again several times throughout the series, and it's going to keep going, because who doesn't love a good science fiction underground experiment clandestine conspiracy?
Yeah, so that's sort of like the running theme through the series.
One of them, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so these are also murder mysteries, so I'm assuming that each book has a separate antagonist.
Yes and no.
Okay.
There are separate antagonists uh, in terms of who commits the murder in each book, but there's also an overarching antagonist for the whole series. The big bad, as they would say in the TV world. Um, a billionaire by the name of David Greger. He's your typical Lex Luthor type villain.
So he's the supervillain for the superhero.
Yes, and there's a big twist involving him in Betrayal, the book that just came out, and the next book in the series called Bitter End will be the end of his arc. Partly because I don't like villains overstaying their welcome, and I think 6 books has been plenty for this guy. And also because the evil billionaire isn't as much fun to write as he used to be.
No, too close to reality these days.
Yes, yes. Looking around at the world, going, I don't like this anymore. So I'm going to give him a nice send off. Well, nice, with that in quotes, in the next book called Bitter End, and then the series can roll on from there. But every book in the series has a storyline involving him, but there's also the villain of the book who commits the murder. Sometimes that person relates to him somehow, sometimes they don't.
Okay, so what's the hardest kind of scene for you to write?
High fantasy. I've tried it. It's not a genre that I want to abandon because it's difficult, but it is difficult because when you're talking high fantasy, you're talking about not just creating your characters and your storyline. You're creating a world. Sometimes you're creating more than one world, and trying to keep all the rules of that world in line throughout the book or the series. Sometimes I have a hard time doing that when I'm reading high fantasy, especially if you've got characters with similar names, or a character's name is similar to a name of a kingdom or whatever. It's even harder to do when you're trying to write, especially for someone like me who's more of a pantser than a plotter. I've learned how to do some plotting, and I learned the value of it, but as someone who mostly just wings what he writes, high fantasy is incredibly difficult, and it's a genre I'd like to publish in someday, but that's a ways down the road because I need to refine what I do before I actually hit publish.
Okay, so what's your favorite scene that you've written in the series?
Ooh. Without venturing into spoiler territory, because it would be very much a spoiler. In Betrayal, the book that just came out, Jill and Gregor have their first physical fight. Throughout the first 4.5 books of the series, every confrontation they'd had been verbal or philosophical, or he's sicking somebody else on her or something like that. Betrayal is the first time that they actually go toe to toe and square off with physical blows. And that was a lot of fun to write. Not just because it was a fight scene, but because of the plot twist that preceded it. And I can't tell you what the plot twist is because I want people to read the book and be shocked.
Yeah, we don't want spoilers.
No, but the plot twist and then the fight that came immediately after the plot twist was one of the most satisfying things I've ever written.
Okay, so do you have any quirky characters in the series, or characters that steal scenes?
There's a side character I introduced in Blood Ties, the second book of the series. It's Detective Earl Stevens. When you first read him, he reads like a stereotypical country boy cop. He's got a gut, a mustache, he wears cowboy boots. He's from Nebraska. He played college football. He talks with an accent. But as the series has gone on, he's become a much deeper character than I expected him to be. which I'm glad for because I don't want my side characters to be two-dimensional cutouts. And his dialogue is so much fun to write because you never know what he's going to say. He's very much a potty mouth, but he's a creative potty mouth. So he'll create swear words. And half the fun is seeing what words he's gonna come up with, what he's gonna say. Sometimes I'll write an interrogation scene and throw him in there just so I'll see what he can say. He's so much fun to write just on dialogue alone. But the depth and the backstory that he develops as the series goes on, that's just icing on the cake.
Okay. Who's your favorite character in the series?
Jill. Because she's the character that makes everything else possible. Not just in terms of the story itself, but Bounty was the first book I ever wrote, finished, and published. So she wasn't the first character I created, but she's the first character that I actually wrote a story to completion and then published book. So without her, nothing else I do as a writer is possible. This banner back here doesn't happen. None of it happens without Jill.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your supernatural fantasy now. Describe the book, the characters, what it's about.
It's very much a chosen one, end of the world prophecy kind of fantasy, which is why it gets compared a lot to stories like Buffy and Supernatural, because that's a lot of what they are as well. The Gem of Nana is a mystical gem of untold power. It's millennia old. It's not even from this planet. It's from another world completely. It just found its way on Earth after it destroyed its home world. So the new chosen one is an archaeology professor named Dr. Jack Corbett. This is where people get the Indiana Jones comparison. So he's the new chosen one. He's the new host of the gem. He gets all of his power and everything, which is great, except he's now in the middle of holy war. And when I say holy war, I don't mean people fighting in the name of religion. Excuse me. I'm talking heaven and hell. Only I don't call them that. I give them different names, the divine and the underworld. Because this book is not an indictment of religion or in favor of religion or anything like that. So I'm as, I don't want to say generic, but that's probably the best, closest word I can think of. The divine and the underworld are at war with each other, have been for millennia. And the ruler of the underworld, a man named Seraphis, or demon named Seraphis, he thinks he can get the gem, and the gem will win him the war, and then he can do what he pleases to Earth. So Jack's in the middle of this war, whether he wants to be or not. And the rest of the book is him trying to navigate what's my place in this war, what do I do about the threat that Seraphis presents, and am I going to have to fight in this war whether I want to or not? And what does that mean for the fate of not only the people I care about, but the fate of the world?
Well, sounds very interesting. Little supernatural, little horror, little fantasy.
A little bit.
Nice mix of everything. So I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell the viewers where they can find you and your books.
You visit my website at jdcuneganbooks.com, jdcunegan books.com. There you'll see all of my works. You'll see I offer editing services for anybody who needs them. I'm also doing art commissions, and I sell signed copies of my work on my website. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All of those links are on my website. My work is available in paperback on Amazon and Barnes & Noble websites. You can find my work on Kindle, Nook, Kobo, Apple iBooks, and on Scribd. So that's where you can find all of my stuff. Go to jdcuneganbooks.com, and anywhere you want to go from there, all the links are right there.
Yeah. So you're all over the place.
I'm all over the place. Just like
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure chatting with you. And Between the Pages Book Chat, we'll be back on Wednesday with another author. So be sure to join us then. Bye for now.
Thank you for having me.